Welcome in today, guys, for our part 2 of our masterclass series. If you guys missed last week, I definitely encourage you to go back and watch that. That was kind of the fundamental part of, hey, how do we go find our deals? How do we get them under contract? How do we finance them? How do we get it to the closing table? And I went all the way from square one to like, how do you market, to where, how do you actually negotiate it and get it under contract, the whole process, right? Now, today, we're going to talk about another huge piece of real estate and everything we do within our company. And I think it's just an integral part if you really want to drive or really want to build equity and have forced appreciation. It's all about the construction piece of it, right? And we're going to talk specifically about value add strategies today, and also like how you can have a high level construction process and how you can drive high level teams. So let's get started. Before we do that though, I do love this first quote. I think this frames it up. So if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. If you guys have heard that quote before, maybe from your coach, maybe from your teacher, it applies so much in when it comes to construction. It's a huge piece. And it's probably where my experience working my W-2 job has really helped me drive this in our company and be comfortable with it, which is kind of a good segue into this slide. I won't go deep into my background, but I worked in corporate America and actually for Shell here in Houston, but I worked in operations the majority of the time. And it was always about planning your business, working with third-party contractors. And I think I've been able to, what I've really enjoyed is taking that experience on like a corporate level and learning all their different best practices and how we planned and how we had best practices and after action reviews. And it's really cool to be able to parlay that and do that in my personal business. And that's kind of evolved over time. Like initially when I was doing real estate, I was just trying to find property to buy. It was all about the acquisition part. But as I got better and more experienced, I learned to be like, okay, now again, initially the phase one, and this is for a lot of people, phase one of construction is you just do it yourself. You're hands-on, you're a weekend warrior, putting the sweat equity into the house. And I started just like a lot of people. I did our first house was a house hack that I bought with me and my wife. We did almost all the repairs, did it with, fortunately I had a really handy, really handy father-in-law who showed me exactly like, we did the plumbing here. His buddy helped us do the plumbing. He was an electrician, so we did all the electrical, pulled all the wire. We did the drywall. We built the entire garage, framed it. We didn't pour the foundation, but we got to see that done. But literally did everything in this house. So I learned a lot of it fundamentally. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of get started. But kind of the next phase is how do you start to build a company out of that? Or even just how do you start to delegate that off? You don't have to build a construction company. You can also just know enough to be dangerous and know how to go manage a third-party contractor. So that's kind of how we've evolved. And then over the years, we evolved from myself doing it, weekend warrior, to working with GCs but eventually you start to run into breaking. We were trying to break through that wall with GCs because there could be a lot of headaches and difficulty there. And you can also pay a premium to use a GC. So the kind of wall we finally broke through a couple of years ago was bringing in-house contractors that work for us and we're able to manage, which gives us a ton more control, which we'll talk a lot about that today, but just wanted to kind of explain the revolution or the evolution of how we've kind of got to where we're at, to where as of today, we have four different crews. We have 3 different crews currently that are on staff, one in northern Wyoming, one in central, and one in southern Wyoming. And we're actually working on a crew out of Billings right now that's been doing a lot of work for us and looking at going potentially exclusive with us, and you got to really help us start to grow into Montana and just to continue to grow the company and drive value. When I get to do acquisitions and I get to sit in that seat and I get to negotiate with these sellers and I know roughly what it's going to cost and how fast I can get contractors in there and what it's going to sell for and what all that scope looks like, it just allows me to do so much more. It allows me to see, hey, exactly how much money I'm going to make on this. Because a typical wholesaler who's negotiating, trying to get a deal done, he doesn't know all that. He's making estimates. He really doesn't know what his end buyer is going to do. That's a big variable, a big unknown variable. But when we negotiate and we do it in our company, I know exactly what that's going to look like. I mean, I'm not going to have a budget finalized, but I'm going to have an idea what it's going to cost. And I'm going to know as soon as I can get my guys in there I'm going to get into that in a second, but timing can be everything when it comes to fixing and flipping. All right. So the keys to success, you guys may have seen this in past presentations, but this is when it comes to fixing and flipping. And then I'm also going to show you guys too, this also applies to value add. So when I talk about fixing and flipping, that's obviously we're trying to buy the property and sell it quickly and make it's always about the velocity of how fast can you turn that money and make a profit, right? But the other strategy we employ a ton, and we're doing that on multiple properties right now, is we buy the property, we do all these renovations, and then we hold it. And excuse me, there might be a refinance in the middle of there, or maybe there isn't. Maybe we already just put permanent financing on it. We just want to work off the cash flow of the property. The biggest risk of this is when you're fixing and flipping, because there's a lot of volatility to fix and flipping. I mean, I kind of put a lot of different things to watch out for, can really get you in trouble. And this is whether you're fixing, flipping, doing value add, really any of it, right? So buying a bad deal, that's more related to what I talked about last week. And that's all about making sure you're buying right on the front end, right? But the next piece is managing contractors. We're going to talk a ton about how to do that today. Not having enough liquidity. This is more of really this does parlay into today, because if you don't have the liquidity to finish the job, your investment is majorly compromised and can be at risk. Seasonality, that's the one I just talked about a second ago, to where when you're looking at a deal and you're looking at a fix and flipper, or no matter what it is, maybe you're just doing a buy and hold, but you're trying to do it in the middle of the summer when all the contractors are busy. Like, you got to understand seasonality of both the market for selling and also the market for contractors and how busy they are. We talk about corrections in the market, that could be a risk. Unforeseen costs. Again, these are all little things. Permits and city regulation. That's something when it comes to construction, you got to be aware of, because that can take a project from maybe a 6-week project to a 6-month project when it comes to the proper permitting and getting your approvals. That's one way that I could, speaking from experience, can really, really push you over budget and really push you over timeline. And if you're using private money or hard money or whatnot, that has a big impact on your bottom line at the end. And the last piece of that is holding costs, right? The longer you hold that thing and you sit on it, you're just going to continue to accumulate holding costs. So understanding your holding costs on the front end is very important. So that's kind of a bigger fundamental part of fix and flip. But I want to get into, all right, now how do we get into the execution of the fix and flip from the construction side? All right. So where this starts out is actually looking backward a little bit. This is before we close on the property. We always want to do what we call as our initial walkthrough. So what this looks like is, again, I do a lot of our negotiations on the front end on whether we're going to buy the house. And I talk to the seller. And one of my first conversations is, okay, we start to talk to terms. I want to make sure that we're close on terms before I go make my contractor, whether that's a GC in a different market I don't have a crew in, or whether that's in a place where I'm going to send my own in-house guy. I value their time. So I want to vet that deal, make sure that we're pretty close on numbers and we're not wasting their time. I mean, there's plenty of times we've sent guys out there and the deal fell through, but just part of it, but we try to screen that. But really, the first thing we want to do is, once we feel like, hey, this is a deal, we want to start to go deeper, especially if it's a bigger scope. We need to understand, because in my initial offer is going to be based on how much is this, what is the rehab cost? That's something that, I've talked to a lot of seasoned investors, and the number one thing that's just not very consistent is, what is the cost going to be? You might have 5 different people who are looking at buying a fix and flip. If you're a wholesaler, you've seen this before, right? You're trying to estimate the rehab, and you'll go have 5 different investors come up with 5 different numbers, right? So knowing your numbers and how to do it is super critical. So what we'll do is we'll have a trusted source go out and look at that. That could be one of my contractors, as I just mentioned. That could be an agent. I'll tell you this, if you could find a good agent who fixes and flips and understands how to give you a rough budget and give you a rough scope, that is incredibly valuable, because then you can send one person, because you're going to need that agent to run your comps and your ARV. But if they can do both, that is huge. Often we'll also do, sometimes we'll just have a runner. This could be somebody who's not an agent, but kind of understands, or at least they could take pictures. Because worst case scenario, at least if you can get pictures and get them to tell you about it, you can kind of get the process started. That's not enough to move forward, but that's a good start, right? Another one is an acquisitions agent. When we've had acquisitions agents like boots on the ground, we've sent them out, like somebody on our behalf, somebody that I currently sit in that role now, or I'm the lead acquisitions guy. But a lot of times I'll have an acquisitions agent go out and walk it, and they can do this too. And then the final one would be an inspector. And that's typically the second step. But sometimes I've actually got some great relationships in some of these small towns in Wyoming where I know the inspector. So and he's an investor too, is actually a really cool example. I have this in Sheridan, to where he'll go out and do it. And we've got a good arrangement to where I could pay him, make him worth his time, but I'm not having to go buy a $500 inspection in this 150 page inspection that it's just going to bog me down, right? He's able to go out there and look at the big systems and look at the big stuff first and give us an idea, so we can start to or start to estimate this rehab. But I kind of just touched on that for a second, but you really, on that first kind of walkthrough, we're really focused on the big capital expenditures, right? That's what you really want to focus on first, right? Is a roof. We're talking about roofs. We're talking about, is the foundation solid? Look at the electrical. Does it look like it needs to be replaced? You might not always know that without opening up walls and going into crawl spaces, but ideally want to do that. The plumbing, what's the plumbing look like? What's the siding look like? The HVAC system, or even water heaters. Those are some of the big ticket items that you want to nail down those first. And then you can kind of, because the cosmetic stuff, the kitchen cabinets, the painting, the flooring, that sort of doors, trim, a lot of that could be estimated, and it's a less, I mean, it'll add up, but ultimately you want to look at the big systems. That's the really key part, right? And then what I always do, I put gut check the budget. I love having a good agent or somebody who can at least give me, like, we're going to go through a detailed work of scope, which I'm about to talk to, but I love them to be able to, like, hey, tell me, is this a $5,000 rehab? Is this a $50,000 rehab? Is it somewhere in between? Like, give me an idea of what we're looking at. Cause again, it takes some time to go through a thorough scope of work. And you really just want to make sure you're in the ballpark with the seller before you get too deep into it. So talking about scope of works, here's kind of like what we call like our 26-point sheet, where we go through we go through the interior of the house, we go through the exterior, we go through everything in here, right? Where again, we're looking at the major capital expenditures. We go room by room, and we have literally like a task list. And from that, we can start to build out our materials list and and then start to do our labor issues. But you really want to focus on like your specific market, right? And what issues they run into. So maybe you have flooding issues, or maybe a lot of these roofs have been totaled out, or they have siding damage, but or maybe a lot of these, there's just a lot, you'll know specifically in your market what you're running into. For another example, Billings, Montana, up by the Rims, beautiful part of the city, but there's so many of those houses that have foundation issues. So that's one of the ones that we're going to want to check and understand on the front end. Now let's talk about sort of the timeline and how we start to really budget this. So what we're going to do is we want to understand, I mean, this is going to be done two ways, right? If you have a GC, like literally he's just going to give you all of this. I'm really kind of breaking this down, assuming you want to break it out yourself and not just have a GC give you this big kind of sort of black box bid where all right, I could do the whole thing for $50,000. And I've done that before with GCs I trusted. And I can tell you it was a lot simpler and a lot less brain damage, but also, yeah, there was some risk to that. I didn't, and those, I've just seen that also not work a lot of different times. So I want to show you guys how to break it down. So if you're breaking down the labor, you just really got to think about how long is this going to take you to do, how many days, right? And the more reps you get at doing this, you get better and better. But initially you're probably going to be off. I'll be honest with you. You're probably going to miss it. And you're probably going to underdo it. So always putting in extra time is huge. But if you simply look at what is the cost of your people, the cost per hour times how many days, you can start to estimate what that looks like, right? And then again, you're going room by room, and you're trying to be as accurate as you can. Let's see, we'll always look at, so the other piece of this is we're looking at timelines, is like, when are you going to start, right? So this is going to be driven by when can your contractor start and when do you think you'll finish. What it looks like for us, again, like perfect example, literally today, we got a contract in last night under contract. We're trying to actually move up the closing because I get a contract signed. My goal as the investor is the day I close that property, sometimes before I've worked it out, I want to have my crew in there starting, because again, it's all about the velocity of how fast you can flip the house, get your money back. That's applies to your private money lender with your partners, or even if it's your own money. The faster you can turn the money, the better. So I want to figure out, when can my contractor come in there? So that's an initial immediate conversation you need to be thinking about is, hey, if you're using a GC, when are you free? When are you going to have an opening? And I definitely would advise you guys to make sure they're being honest with you, because probably one of the biggest downfalls of contractors is they overcommit and they say they can do it and they really can't. So you really got to push them there and maybe ask deeper questions. Be like, hey, is there any other job? I know you're telling me you can do this, but do you understand that I make money by you starting day one? And if you have other jobs that get pushed, like, are there any jobs that could get pushed that could change this? So asking those questions to your GC is super important. And if you're doing it with your own crew, hopefully you're going to know your schedule. Or I'm going to talk to my project manager and say, hey, is this going to fit into the schedule? Do we have availability for this? And then the other option is, so you're going to have your starting point and your ending point, and you're going to do your best to stay on timeline. But one way to accelerate it is bring in more people. Because again, it's, there is a fine line between bringing in too many people and doing too many things at once, and everybody's stepping on each other's toes, and you got to be careful there. And that's just one you're going to have to depend on experience, whether you have it or your general contractor. But I've seen that many times too, and your contractors will get very frustrated with you if they can't do their thing. Honestly, that's probably one of the biggest frustrations I bet contractors have is not being able, because they value their time as well. They want to get in there and get out so they can get paid. So staging that in is important. But there are times too where you can, if it's a big house or if it's a big multifamily, this has been great for us to where we've decided that, all right, we had 3 buildings and had a crew for a while there. We had 2 different crews, almost 3, one in each building that were working on different stuff. And that allowed us to where we could finish this in twice the speed, right? That's a luxury of having a big project. But or maybe you're doing a development with multiple new construction houses. You can have multiple crews going. But a lot of that, just want to make the point that you can accelerate your timeline, but you got to be careful that people aren't stepping on each other if you're just doing a single family house. Let's move into the budget. So thinking about this, I kind of broke it down as like ABC. So A, you're thinking about what are your total materials and purchases, right? That's the first piece. That one, you can go to homedepot.com and look up a lot of things. There's a ton of tools out there and templates to estimate this stuff. I'm also happy to help share some of that stuff with you guys, but that's this is the most predictable piece, right? Is the material piece, right? The next one is the labor cost. So you could be, maybe you're going to go out and hire laborers yourself, and you know how many those people you're going to need times what you have to pay them per hour times how many days. You can calculate that. Or you go talk to a GC or a subcontractor and they can bid that out for you. And then the last piece is going to be your miscellaneous line items, right? So those are things that are not in your top materials, not in your labor, but still need to be added in here. And then, so you kind of put all those in your budget to come up with that. I would say the other thing about the miscellaneous items is sometimes those are your unknowns, right? So some people use 5%, 10%. I'd recommend a 10% of the total project gets put into miscellaneous because you're never going to identify everything. I mean, unless you've been doing this forever and it's a cookie. If you're remodeling and doing a fix and flip, or take an existing house, I can almost guarantee you're never going to get it all. But new construction, maybe yes. But anyway, you want to have that contingency. And based on your tolerance and experience, you can tweak that number. Maybe it's 10%. I still want to use 10%. But if you're really good at this, maybe it's only 5. Maybe it's 2.5. But you can throttle that up and down. So things to remember, right? So we've been talking a lot about like a GC and whether to do it yourself. So if you have a GC, you certainly save a lot of time and potentially time and money because they're going to handle it for you. But on the flip side, you're going to pay a premium. They're obviously going to get paid for their time, and you're going to lose control. When you have a GC, they're going to do their thing and they're going to have a bid. And I mean, you are the customer. You can tell them what you want, but ultimately they're the ones controlling it day to day. And that's one downside we found, that we just wanted to be able to, hey, we want to control the process from start to finish. And we also wanted to control like what their schedules were, because the other thing about a GC is when he's working for a bunch of different people. And if your job is not the biggest priority, or there's a ton of different variables, again, probably the most frustrating part about working with contractors is when they don't show up and they're working on other jobs, not your job. Well, when you bring people in-house, at least you know if they're not on your job, you know where they're at, and they're probably on another job because that one's obviously more important. But when you give up that control because you go with a GC, it's just a trade-off. But you also get back your time. I could tell you, managing crews and being accountable for the budget and being accountable when it goes over budget, it adds a lot of risk and it adds a lot more work. I've gone back and forth many, many times where I'm like, man, I should have just hired a GC because he would have gave me a bid and I could have held him to that bid, and I wouldn't have to worry about these overages, and I wouldn't have to worry about managing all the contractors and making sure they're staying on budget and make sure they're being productive. Like, that's a lot of management and a lot of work goes into that. So I wouldn't take that lightly. And I don't honestly recommend doing that from the start. I would do, if I was doing my first fix and flip or doing my first rehab for a BRRRR strategy or a rental, I'd do it all myself, or I would be there watching the contractors and the subcontractors, right? That would be step one. The next phase is working with GCs and more subcontractors. And then eventually, if you want to take the next sort of step, that's when you bring guys in-house and have that control. Some other things to kind of consider is, especially if you're working, kind of doing stuff in-house, which is again what we do, is travel time or trucks and tools. Like those costs add up. Gas adds up, tools add up, tools especially add up. So being able to factor that in and estimate that's important. The other thing is buying in bulk. Like what's been really awesome for us is doing this big 63 unit apartment is we were able to buy a bunch of carpet in bulk, bunch of paint, vanities, you name it, right? Windows, we're getting better pricing because we're buying in bulk. So as you scale up, that's a really big advantage you start to get, but you're not going to get it right away. And it's just been a benefit for our company as we've grown and done more projects, and obviously things start to get more cost effective. One other thing we've done is we do Home Depot. And we're going to be putting together some content around kind of the relationships we've created with Home Depot, but we wanted to make it easy as we can, because the other piece is making this easy on your guys to get materials. That helps you keep your timeline down, that I didn't put in the slide back today, but that's a big key one that we try to make it as easy as we can with them. But one nice part about these big box stores is the incentives, the credits. Maybe it's the points on your credit card. But what they do is we get points at Home Depot, and we use those extra points to actually go buy tools. And that helps us continue to build up our company and have better equipment. And it's just kind of a nice way to where we didn't have to plan to invest in those tools. They've kind of paid for themselves by doing volume. The last one, and this is typically what you do. We love to do this at the end of every project, and it's called an after action review, right? I learned this in corporate America. We used to do this all the time at Shell. Is after every well that we drilled, or every well that we went and fracked, whatever we were doing, maybe as a workover, you always had an after action review after you got done, and then you could go back through it. What went well, what didn't go well, and how can we implement that into next time? That's another thing to do in construction. I can guarantee you probably 90% of people do not do that, but if you do it, you'll get better and better at this. Okay, that's a good kind of overview. I want to show you guys a couple case studies. So this first one is in Sheridan, and I'm going to kind of show you the evolution as we've kind of gotten better and better. So this was the first fix and flip that we did with our crew in Sheridan. This was an in-house crew. So you can see we bought this house for $250,000. The rehab budget was $63,000. Our holding cost on that was $9,000. And you'll see on this next one, our holding costs were a lot low, because holding it for 6 months is quite a while, right? So we made $24,000 on this job, which to me was a great win. It wasn't what we wanted to make and not what we strive for now, but the fact that it was our first job and we were profitable was great. We were working with a new crew. We were working the scope for the first time. We were working through buying all the materials. It also was it wasn't a straightforward like remodel, like, hey, all we're going to go do is paint and carpet, and we're going to be out. It was a lot of things. And this is what happens in remodeling. You just always find more things that you want to do, and it just kind of keeps adding up. But anyway, this one still turned out good, made a profit. And you can see the beautiful kitchen here. This one turned out really good. One thing that was really cool on this case study that I was really excited that we got feedback from an agent who walked that house, and we were talking about a deal a couple months later. He's like, hey, well, I know your guys' crews and they do good work. He's like, I saw this house. He's like, this house was a disaster before you guys came in, and I saw how it turned out. So this was a pretty cool one. Our team's very proud of. So the second one this crew did was a little bit later on. I think it was literally right after this one, is they moved into this one on Zuni in Sheridan. So this one, look at this. We got it in and out in 3 months. So half the time. So you see our holding costs were very low on this. So that made us more profitable. I mean, because the purchase price, the rehab, those are a little bit different. But at the end of the day, we made $41,000 in 3 months. So if you're looking at your return on, like, I mean, if I showed you guys the amount of money we put into this, I could show you like basically our cash on cash return. So much less than this where I wait for 6 months, and versus this one where I get my money back in 3. So we got much better on this one, doing our scopes, ordering materials. Just we got more familiar with my project manager and my lead foreman working together, knowing what we need. And again, just the more times you do this, guys, if you're doing construction, you're going to get better and better. And again, after action review, we did one after the first one. We implemented a lot of things here. Our third case study was a bigger project. So this one was actually longer just because it was a bigger scope. We did foundation work. We did new roofs. We did a deck. We did this whole house, and this house was a disgusting disaster. A lot of people, that's why we got it such a good discount. That's why our profit was like $85,000, was we found a major distressed house. But it took us 5 months. So, but again, this is not where I would start if I were you. I would not take on this was a $160,000 rehab. So I would not advise people to do this. But once you get good at construction and have confidence in your crews, these are deals. I can tell you, no one else was offering on this house and wanting to take this job. But because we had the confidence, we ultimately reaped the rewards. So another cool case study as we've kind of show you guys. So this last one is, I've been proud of all 3 of these, but this one is probably the coolest one and having the biggest impact. And I want to show you guys what having construction crews and how it really starts to differentiate you, especially in multifamily. So this one is a case study in Casper. We're actually going to do a full presentation and YouTube video around this one as we start, because we're finishing up. And I really want to show you guys this transformation. It's one I'm very, very proud of. We bought this to show you the numbers. We bought this for $3.2 million. We're projecting we're going to put about $825,000 into this. I can tell you that's way over budget, and that still happens even with our experience level. I mean, this one was known. This one was conscious being over budget because we were planning to rehab about 16 to 30 units, but we ended up being like, you know what, we're here. We got contractors. We're going to do this property right. And in these other units, we're not going to just go and clean them up, and we're going to actually make them good and make this whole property improve the whole value. So we ended up touching 55 units. So if you kind of do the math, we put about $15,000 in each one of these units, but we did a ton. Like, you'll get to see more you can kind of see some before and after pictures down there, but it's a complete transformation. But here's the cool thing, right? So to show you guys the math on this, one of these units actually appraised for $90,000 just a couple months ago. And actually I think 90,000 is low because this appraised when this was in a building that was a complete mess. Like, there was only like one unit that was even livable. The rest of them were just in rough shape. So this actually appraised while the whole building was in a mess, and it's still appraised for 90,000. So now that this whole building is going to be renovated and the hallway is nice and the exterior and everything, it's going to be worth even more than that. But I wanted to be conservative and show you guys the numbers. So based on that $90,000 value, if we multiply that times how many units there are, which is currently at 65 units we own, if you do the math on that, minus and subtract, so that would be the value of all 65 units minus our rehab plus our purchase, we've created $1.644 million of value, which is crazy. And it really makes you rethink wanting to do all the fix and flip stuff we do, because we made all this on one project. Granted, we started on it last July, so we're going to be going on about 9 months here, hoping to finish that in our timeline is actually to finish it within 11 months, which I think would be a huge win. It'd be a really big win for our team. But just wanted to show you guys the power of multifamily and having crews. As I've cited this deal a couple times throughout this presentation, where we had multiple crews in multiple buildings, and you start to get efficient, right? We start to do painting multiple times. You get the benefit of materials. You guys can imagine all this stuff when you're doing things at scale, but you could really start to make more money and create more value, which again, I just wanted to highlight this and this is really, guys, the kind of last thing I'll say on this one is this is parlayed into our next project. Cause now I saw another project that we're under contract, going to close. I've been talking a lot about it. It's 45 units that are in a similar state. And again, this is why we're getting this deal, because I think this property we're buying is probably 20% occupied. So it's not making any money, but I see that, hey, this is in a great market. And it's just because all these units aren't fixed up. Like, that's fixable. I can bring crews in and do that. We can go repeat exactly what we did. But that comes with confidence. That comes with doing this and just going through a property. I would not have had the confidence from a year ago, before I did all this, right? That I could go get a crew, take on a huge scope like this and be able to fund it, be able to manage it, and kind of walk through it. But once you do it once, and then you're like, all right, where's the next one? Because it's very powerful. Obviously, looking at this thing I got highlighted in green, creating $1.6 million of value in a deal is huge. So that, the last thing is I wanted to just show you kind of some of our other flips we have in the pipeline that we're working on. We're actually, as of this presentation today, this one here in Grubstake that we've actually sold. And that one was that one took us about 6 months. It was a little bigger scope than we're expecting. This one here in Evanston is actually closing next week, which was a good return for both us and our private money investor. And this one in McMicken, we finished that one. That one's supposed to be closing. We're just working through some of the title work, and then we'll be closing that one. So anyway, these are kind of our current pipeline of flips that we got going, we've had crews going in and out of. So that's going to kind of wrap it up for today. I want to give you guys a chance to ask any questions, but if you guys enjoyed it today, please do leave comments wherever you're watching this, or if you have questions, let me know. And if you guys want to scan this QR code, it's going to give you a bunch of different resources. It's going to give you a direct link to our YouTube channel, so you can go watch more videos like this and learn more on construction or flipping or rentals, whatever you're interested. Maybe you're trying to find your next deal. How do you do direct to seller? Whatever it is, we'll help you out there. And then you can also see a link to my Instagram. If you guys are on Instagram or Facebook, let's connect there. I try to share a lot of what's going on in our business, and I just enjoy doing it. And if you guys like it, please engage with it. It definitely helps me a lot. And lastly, here's just within that same QR code, you could book a 15-minute call with me. If you want to talk about, hey, you're trying to go buy your next deal and need help finding the deal, or how to underwrite the deal, or you just want to find a turnkey bought property, love to talk about that. Or there's a lot of people that are going to watch this today and be like, man, that's awesome. That's a lot of work. I don't have time to do all that. I don't have time to go manage a crew. I don't don't have time to go vet crews. And I didn't even talk about screening and vetting your contractors. That's a whole nother ball game that's a huge piece of this, right? But a lot of people don't want to do all that. They're like, you know what? I'd rather be either a limited partner on deals, or they want to just be a private money lender and just be the bank and lend out at a good rate. So if you guys want to talk on that, please go to this QR code, scan it, and book a call with me. And yeah, I hope you guys learned something on the construction part of it today. And I encourage you guys, if you do go back and watch this, please comment or send me a direct message if you have any questions on this. I want to definitely, the interactions is a big reason why I do this too, is I want to be able to engage with you guys and help you out. So I encourage you to leave comments below. And with that, we'll wrap up, and hopefully you guys will talk to you soon. And hey, stay tuned again for the next part 3 is going to be dive into, hey, we found the property, we fixed it up, now we're ready to rent it out. How do we manage property management? So we'll go into that in part 3 of this series.